Test pour la ligne 3.
All right, good morning. Good morning, everyone. Oh, I see some journalists who normally sit on the left-hand side have moved over to the right-hand side. Well, that's good. Let's spread people out. Good morning, everyone. Bonjour à tous et à toutes. Alors, avant de commencer, juste une petite annonce. So this is from Jennifer Fenton from the Office of the Special Envoy in Syria, who couldn't be with us today, but she asked me to convey this. The UN Special Envoy for Syria, Mr. Pedersen, is in Moscow to meet with the Foreign Minister and the Minister of Defense. He intends to travel to Damascus next week, and his next security briefing to the Security Council is scheduled for the 29th of January. So I'm sure we'll send you a reminder of this, and I expect that it would be webcast on webtv.un.org. We're going to get right to our agenda with Elizabeth Throssell from the OHCHR on the reaction to the International Court of Justice finding on Myanmar. You will have received yesterday as well, or late evening last night, the reaction of the Secretary General as well, who welcomed the order of the International Court of Justice indicating provisional measures in the case of the Gambia against Myanmar on the alleged breaches of the Genocide Convention. The Secretary General strongly supports the use of peaceful means to settle international disputes. He further recalls that pursuant to the Charter and to the statute of the court, decisions of the court are binding. He trusts that Myanmar will duly comply with the court's order, and in accordance with the statute of the court, the Secretary General will promptly transmit the notice of the provisional measures ordered by the court to the Security Council. Again, I refer you to his full statement circulated last evening. And we'll turn it over to Elizabeth. Good morning.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Yes, we will also be speaking about what Rial has just mentioned. We welcome the order by the International Court of Justice that Myanmar must take all measures within its power to protect the members of the Rohingya group from all future acts that may amount to genocide under the provisions of Article 2 of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. The High Commissioner has repeatedly expressed serious concerns about the situation of the Rohingya following the repeated waves of violence suffered by them, most recently in 2016 and 2017. She has frequently called for the full protection of their human rights and genuine accountability for the serious violations and abuses they have endured. As the Secretary-General noted yesterday, as Rial just pointed out, these provisional measures indicated by the Court are binding under international law. The UN Human Rights Office calls on Myanmar to immediately and unconditionally implement them in full, consistent with its obligations under the Charter and the Court statutes. The proceedings before the Court are vitally important, opening up a path towards judicial determination of Myanmar's possible responsibility as a state under the Genocide Convention for the acts of persecution and severe repression of the Rohingya. Alongside other international investigative and accountability processes that are likewise ongoing, we urge the authorities of Myanmar to cooperate fully with all of these inquiries and at the same time to take active, effective steps enabling the Rohingya to live in peace and dignity in Myanmar, able to enjoy all their human rights. We note that the Court, for the purposes of its decision yesterday, repeatedly referenced the conclusions of the International Independent Fact-Finding Mission on Myanmar, mandated by the UN Human Rights Council, as well as the resolutions of the UN General Assembly addressing the situation of the Rohingya. The fact-finding mission last year concluded that there was a serious risk that genocidal actions directed at the Rohingya may recur. More broadly, the fact-finding mission also identified human rights abuses by the military against other ethnic minorities during decades of conflict. Addressing these legacies of impunity remains an essential precondition to a future of sustainable peace and enduring justice for all people in Myanmar. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Lisa.
Hi, you confused me. You changed your... Never mind. Yeah, we've got two questions. First, when will a determination on genocide actually be made? Will it be made? Will it be a long time? And the fact that it hasn't been made, does that sort of blunt some of the conclusions of the court? And then, though the Secretary General or you, Rael, said that the decisions of the court are binding, are there any sanctions in order to enforce these this ruling on the government in Myanmar?
Okay, Lisa, well, if I may address the first two questions in particular. You're asking about when a genocide determination will be made. Well, I mean, obviously that is for the processes that are ongoing. We have here the International Court of Justice, and as to what are the next steps, that's something that you should refer to them. So it's not really the UN Human Rights Office who is able to say when a genocide determination will be made. What we would underscore is that, of course, the UN Human Rights Office has been at the forefront of flagging the human rights abuses and violations suffered by the Rohingya in numerous reports, numerous appeals by the High Commissioner and by the previous High Commissioner. You're asking about whether any length in having a genocide determination blunts the conclusions of the court. Well, I think, again, that's a process that is separate to what the Human Rights Office does. But as we pointed out, the findings of the fact-finding mission on Myanmar were considered by the court, were very important. The fact-finding mission, of course, as you know, was mandated by the Human Rights Council. And what we have now, the successor, if you were, to the fact-finding mission, is the Independent Investigative Mechanism for Myanmar, the IIMM. That is also mandated by the Human Rights Council, as I've said. It's compiling individual criminal cases for prosecution in a court of competent jurisdiction. And in doing so, it will, of course, draw as appropriate on the material that has been handed to it by the fact-finding mission. So obviously, with the work regarding the Myanmar mechanism, any queries should be addressed directly to them. But as you can see, there are several strands underway with regard to this. What we would underscore as the Human Rights Office on behalf of the High Commissioner is that she has repeatedly expressed serious concerns about the situation of the Rohingya.
Yeah, as for your question on the, how these decisions are binding, I'm not an expert in this either. I'd really have to go back to the court and see how exactly the court monitors the implementations of its decisions. From the Secretary General's point of view, I mean, as he said yesterday, he's going to be transmitting the notice of these provisional measures to the Security Council, I guess, for their assessment as well, and see what that body has to say about that.
From what I've read, there are no sanctions, and if there's no enforcement mechanism, how can you get the government in Myanmar to actually implement the ruling of the courts? And, I mean, do you really think that this ruling is going to make the people at the Rohingya safer?
Look, I think really when a decision by a court is taken, the expectation would be that the member states would try to respect those decisions and take the measures that are recommended regarding that decision. As for further action that would be able to be taken, again, I'd have to see what the court, what kind of mechanisms it has that can pursue this. So I can't say much more on that at the moment, but I'll look into it, and if I can find out more, I'll let you know.
Well, I think, as I indicated, any real queries with regard to how the court, in this case the International Court of Justice, proceeds should be directed to them. But what I do understand is that the court has asked Myanmar to submit a report to it within 4 months, with additional reports due every 6 months until they have rendered a final decision. But I would underscore that with regard to the actual process and way forward of the ICJ, you should direct queries to them.
Yeah, in his message yesterday, he says it very clearly that he trusts that Myanmar will duly comply with the order from the court. Nick, you had a question?
Yeah, I mean, the order from the court is fairly general. So does OHCHR have specific actions it wants to see taken in to give force to these this ruling? And secondly, the Myanmar's own internal investigation has produced a report. Okay, have you got any comment on the findings of that body?
Nick, with regard to the UN Human Rights Office, I mean, we obviously have several different mandates with regard to Rohingya. What we have done is continue to build our capacity with regard to work on Myanmar. We are continuing to discuss ways we could assist Myanmar to implement some of the recommendations that have been made by the different human rights mechanisms with regard, for example, the Special Rapporteur. What we think, of course, is that this would best be served if we could establish a presence inside the country. But what we do for now is we engage through regular missions to Myanmar and working with the UN country team in Myanmar. What I said earlier is, of course, that the UN Human Rights Office has, over the past few years, spoken repeatedly on the situation regarding the Rohingya, launching its own reports, its own missions to the region. And as you've seen, there have been sort of a process where you had the fact-finding mission and now you have the investigative mechanism that's been set up. With regard to the internal report of the Myanmar government, we don't comment on other people's reports.
Are there other questions? Yeah, Gabriela.
Thank you, Real. I have a question on another subject, if it's possible for Liz. Yeah? Okay, so I have a question on Mexico, on the caravan of migrants that was going from Central America to Mexico. They were blocked in a very, very aggressive way for the Guardia Nacional with shields. They were throwing tear gas to them. They were chasing migrants to detain them. It is appalling to see the videos about that. So what are your comments on that, and if the Agency for Refugees has something to say as well? And then I have another question on disappearances. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabriela. Well, with regard to the reports of the force that's being used, of course, what we would say is that any use of force to either detain or disperse migrants, in this case in caravans, should be avoided. The use of force, and that includes of less lethal weapons, should be in line with the basic principles on the use of force and firearms and the guidance on less lethal weapons in law enforcement. So these are guidelines that set out what can be done. These cover the principles of necessity, prior warning and proportionality. And what we would underscore is that restraint should be ensured in all instances.
I don't know, Andre, do you have anything to add to this particular issue?
Just very quickly echoing what Liz has already said, Mexico also has the sovereign right to determine who enters the territory, subject to the limits of the international law, including norms to protect refugees. Among the large number of people arriving to Mexico's southern border, there are likely to be people in need of international protection. Now, any person claiming to be fleeing violence and persecution has the right to seek asylum and should be allowed access to the territory and to the asylum procedures. It will be also important to ensure that all people who have been admitted to Mexico are screened for potential international protection needs and provided with information and timely access to the asylum system in Mexico.
Okay, a follow-up question?
Yes. Mexico is blocking the entrance of migrants because of the USA pressure that they have. Do you think that USA is polluting the asylum policy in Central America, in Mexico? And some people are saying that this is a humanitarian crisis. Are you agree with that qualification?
I mean, right now we are present in Mexico and in Guatemala border to identify people with international protection needs and offer information on the right to seek asylum for those fleeing violence and persecution and who may be part of the larger group of people who are currently on the move in Central America. As we said, this is a situation of a mixed movement where there might be refugees among those who are among the larger group that is on the move. We obviously are ready to support governments in the region to respond to this movement in line with their obligations under international law. As I said, every country does have a sovereign right to determine its immigration and border control policies. However, we note that under the international law, any person claiming to be fleeing violence and persecution has the right to seek asylum and should be allowed access to territory and asylum procedures.
Gabrielle, if I also may add to what Andre has said, is that all migration governance policies must respect human rights and basically have the protection of the rights of people on the move as their main objective. People who are on a state's territory or under its jurisdiction come under that state's human rights obligations, and you can't deny these by, for example, by not enabling people to access their rights, and they can't be outsourced, for example, by sending them back to third countries.
Okay, you have another question on another topic. Okay. Yes, Lisa.
Very quickly, is Mexico a safe country for asylum? with all the gangs, the murders, the kidnappings, the etc.?
Mexico does have an asylum system. We do have also field staff that can support effort of the Mexican authorities to identify protection needs of people who have been admitted to the territory. We have agreed to assist Mexican Refugee Office, COMAR, with the processing of asylum claims by people who express a fear of return to their countries of origin. And under Mexican law, asylum seekers must remain in the state where they claim asylum until their case is decided upon.
Gabriela, do you still have another? Okay, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Well, they didn't answer the question about if Mexico is a safe country, but I would like to ask that, well, in Mexico, there are 60,000, according to the government, 60,000 disappearances, 5,000 in this year only. And in the last year, with the new government, there have been 34,000 people killed. So my question is for Liz, what are your comments on the disappearances in the current government in Mexico? Are they doing, okay, your comments, please.
Thank you, Gabriela. Yes, I understand that there are sort of figures with regard to the number of disappeared people in Mexico. That I think earlier this month, on the 6th of January, the federal authorities had a press conference to reveal the official record of disappeared people. What we would say to that is that, of course, we are concerned by what are, frankly, horrific numbers. They reflect the difficult security situation and the continuing human rights challenges that Mexico faces. What we would also stress is that the policy shift of the current administration has in fact resulted in increased attention to the topic of disappeared persons. You have the creation of the National Commission for the Search of Missing Persons and the National Registry of Disappeared Persons, which brought about the consolidation of these numbers, I understand. We think these are positive steps. They're in line with the provisions of the Mexican General Law on Disappearances. That was in fact created with the collaboration of the UN Human Rights Office. So what we would have is that, of course, the numbers are shocking, but we think that it is welcome that there is a renewed attention on the issue of disappeared people in Mexico.
Okay, thank you. I think we'll close it here on that. Thank you very much, Liz. Thank you, Andre. Let's bring up Jens Lark from OCHA, who has some information on the killings in Abyei.
Good morning, everyone. The humanitarian coordinator in Sudan, Gui Yop Sun, has condemned a deadly attack on a village in the disputed Abyei area between Sudan and South Sudan that left 32 people killed, 25 people injured, 3 children missing, and 19 houses torched. The violence happened in the early hours of the 22nd of January when armed men attacked the village of Kulom, about 9 kilometers northwest of Abyei town. The humanitarian coordinator last night called on all parties to refrain from any acts that can increase tensions and the risk of further violence. The Kulom village and surrounding villages have experienced armed attacks with casualties since November last year. Humanitarian organizations on the ground are providing healthcare assistance, including emergency surgical operations, to the survivors of the attack. OCHA is coordinating humanitarian responses in Abyei, and we are working to dispatch an interagency needs assessment team to the area shortly, and also agencies are helping some 500 people who fled the area and are now in Abyei town. To give you a bit of context, this year humanitarian partners aim to provide aid to 200,000 people in the Abyei area, which is affected by a complex mesh of cultural and socio-economic conflicts, involving the agro-pastoralist Dinka and the pastoralist Miseria communities. The continued intercommunal tensions, population movements, including during last year's flooding, and the absence of public institutions and services have resulted in high humanitarian and recovery needs. Besides basic material support in terms of health, nutrition, food assistance, and water, there are high protection risks related to sexual and gender-based violence, child protection, and the contamination of explosive remnants of war in this area. The number of people in need in 2020, as I mentioned, over 200,000, increased by 10% compared to last year. Thank you.
Thanks, Jens. Lisa.
Jens, who are these armed men who did the attack, and was the attack a consequence of this inter-ethnic violence between the Dinka and the group of pastoralists? Is that what's behind this?
Yes, it is yet another but extremely violent example of these intercommunal clashes that we have seen for a very long time in Abyei. It was Kulom village which was attacked. Is a Dinka village. It happened in the early morning hours. We're not in a position to exactly identify who did it, but we now know that 32 people were killed there. The reports this morning talks about that the village may be completely empty of people now. As I mentioned, we are planning to send a needs assessment mission to see for ourselves what the situation is there, and of course provide assistance to those who were wounded. 25 were wounded and are taken care of, and to provide assistance to those who have fled the village and are now in Abyei town.
So then you don't know who instigated the attack, whether it was the Dinka or what's the name of the pastoralist group? I didn't get that. And also, how many people are we talking about? You say that the village is emptied of its inhabitants. How many are there, and where have they gone?
I cannot say for sure who instigated the attack. We were not there to witness what happened. We know it's a Dinka village, and that people have left. It is a village. I don't know exactly how many people live there, but we have assessed since the attack that some 500 people are now in Abyei town. Where they are sheltering, I believe, in some schools there. And we are trying to provide assistance to them there.
So it's become a ghost town, essentially, ghost village?
I will not confirm that because we have not been there ourselves yet. But we have reports that the town may have been emptied, or the village may have been emptied.
Are there other questions? Okay, thank you, Jens. Let's move on. Andre, come back up to the podium with Mr. Andrew Harper, who is the UNHCR Special Advisor on Climate Action. Both are here to talk to you about the Human Rights Committee decision on climate change earlier this week.
Thank you very much. Morning again, ladies and gentlemen. We have two items today. First one is on the Human Rights Committee decision, which you were informed about earlier this week through the press release of the Human Rights Office. The UNHCR welcomes this week's ruling of the Human Rights Committee in the case of Te Tiota versus New Zealand. While the claim to protection in the case of Mr. Te Tiota was denied on grounds that he was not at imminent risk, the committee nonetheless determined that people who flee the effects of climate change and natural disasters should not be returned to their country of origin if essential human rights would be at risk on return. This is a landmark decision with potentially far-reaching implications for the international protection of displaced people in the context of climate change and disasters. Two key points for us, that it underscores the importance of countries taking action to prevent or mitigate against harms associated with climate change, which in future could otherwise force people to leave, triggering then international obligations. And secondly, that this ruling recognizes that the international refugee law is applicable in the context of climate change and disaster displacement. I would now ask Andrew Harper, who is the Special Advisor in UNHCR on climate action, he will make some opening remarks and then we will be happy to respond to any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Andre, and thank you everyone for being here. I think the ruling can be, or the decision can be summarised by saying, if we do not do more to prevent, then we will inevitably have an obligation to protect. And there's been one after another wake-up calls, whether it be from bushfires in Australia, glaciers melting, flooding, droughts. But here is a decision which has been made by the Human Rights Committee, which again demonstrates the need for the international community to be doing more, with the very real expectation that if we do not succeed in providing the resilience, the capacity for communities to survive this climatic catastrophe, then we'll have to be doing much more on the protection front. The committee, while making this decision, importantly referred to the need for robust national and international efforts. It wasn't one of defeatism. It was basically saying we need to be doing more together to prevent these triggers from taking place. Working with the Refugee Agency, we know no one likes to be displaced. No one wants to leave their homes. No one wants to see the map behind us changing so people have to find safety and security in another location. What the committee came up with was it warned that the risk of an entire country becoming submerged by rising sea levels is such an extreme risk that before it is realised, conditions of life in such a country may become incompatible with the right to life with dignity. As the briefing note outlined, these references are important alerts to states and the international community as a whole. We know that states themselves are trying to do as much as they can, particularly those states in the front line. These are the Pacific states. These are the states in South Asia, the states in Africa. However, we need to be doing it in a much more collaborative, cohesive and impact-oriented manner. We cannot afford to be reactive. The size, scale, speed and complexity of displacement is changing the way in which we work. We need to be able to anticipate and to prepare for emerging situations before they happen. We as UNHCR are looking to work with states, and this came out through the Global Refugee Forum recently, to see how we can look to mitigate the impact of what is already evident. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harper. Are there questions? Yes, Nick.
What's your estimate of the number of people who are at imminent risk of displacement as a result of climate?
I think probably one of the biggest challenges that we have is to avoid going down a rabbit hole of speculating numbers when it's almost impossible to anticipate what those numbers are. What I can say is that whole communities are going to be at increasing risk. And when we talk about displacement, there's almost sort of this hysteria about how many people are going to be flooding into one location or another. As I premised my intervention, the issue is people do not want to leave their homes. They don't want to leave their communities. They will try and stick it out as long as possible. So the anticipation of numbers being forced to leave, being forced to move across international borders is really up to us. How effective will we be in being able to take heed of these calls for action? So the populations in Kiribati, the populations in the Marshall Islands, the population in Southern Asia, in Africa, they are at risk. They will be made more vulnerable. The other element too is that the most vulnerable populations do not have the capacity to leave. They don't have the resources. So you have different populations. You'll have the populations that can't move because they're just so poor. You'll have populations who will be internally displaced, and you'll be having populations which will cross international borders. So it's really up to us to determine what will be the extent of displacement in the future. What this ruling says is that we're not doing enough, and we have to be doing more. We have to be doing it in a much more robust manner, and states have an obligation to support this. Otherwise, there will be protection mechanisms triggered in the future.
Any other questions? Yeah, Lisa.
So, what exactly should we do, short of resolving the climate change crisis and conundrum? And there are, as we all know, great difficulties in that. Other than that, I mean, are you sort of making an appeal that on the basis of this case, that people who claim that asylum because of climate change should be given a fair hearing and the protections accorded in refugees?
UNHCR is calling for, and this is, we've repeated this before, is calling for urgent international action to prevent and mitigate climate-induced displacement. So what does that actually mean? It means working together. It means setting up early warning systems. It talks about forecasting and working on disaster risk reductions with others, scaling up efforts on adaptation and resilience. We need to be working with the communities and the states in listening to them and saying, how can we support you in mitigating what we already know what is coming and adapting to a changing world? If we can be successful in the mitigation and adaptation, then we do have a chance of maybe not preventing all displacement, but at least reducing the level of displacement. So it's not beyond hope that we can be doing more on prevention. If you then start breaking it down into what's going to be required in the future, this step by the Human Rights Committee is so important because it reinforces the normative element. It provides that international humanitarian law, human rights law, can be applied in climate context. This is important for us to be working with others, including states, to make sure that not only the country instruments but regional instruments can be made basically capacitated in order to provide the necessary protection. It provides the means in which claimants should have their cases assessed thoroughly before decisions are being made. So this is a positive movement. We should be looking at integrating policy frameworks on human mobility. We should be looking to see how we can do more in regards to supporting adaptation, whether it could be migration in some elements. But it's more about having a collective purpose towards addressing it. We saw that when states got together in Madrid last year, not much was achieved. We have to be finding other avenues, other mechanisms, other almost friends of refugees, of people who are vulnerable, to see what difference we can make. There is a UN platform on disaster displacement, which already has over 100 stakeholders. They have a plan of action. We are working with states. Again, this is not something which is UN alone or humanitarian organisations. Many states understand the threat that is there and the need to be doing more. What we wish to do is to try and we need to underline the urgency of the need to operationalise this plan of action to ensure that it's been properly resourced and to support the countries most at risk.
Any final questions on this? Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Harper, for being with us this morning. Andre, I think you stay with us for a statement on the refugee response plan in Ethiopia.
Very quickly, we are UNHCR and partners are appealing for robust international support for refugee operations in Ethiopia with the launch of a funding appeal for $658 million to assist 735,000 refugees and more than 500,000 of their Ethiopian hosts in 2020. International support and solidarity is vital to ensure the implementation of the wide range of rights granted to refugees by Ethiopia during the last 3 years. The country's revised laws grant refugees the right to work and access social services, facilitating their inclusion among the communities where they live in Ethiopia. The Ethiopia Refugee Response Plan, launched in Addis Ababa this morning, covers humanitarian activities by UNHCR and 57 other humanitarian partners. It seeks to address huge gaps in health, nutrition, education and shelter, while also investing in sectors including sanitation, energy and livelihoods. Just to flag that in January last year, Ethiopia adopted progressive laws which allow refugees to obtain work permits, access primary education and obtain driver's licenses. Additionally, they enable refugees to register essential events such as births and gains access to national financial services such as banking. There are more details in the briefing note, but just to flag that UNHCR is part of the overall interagency humanitarian effort to assist over 1.5 million Ethiopians displaced also due to conflicts and climate shocks. Following the government's large-scale IDP returns last year, UNHCR has been supporting reintegration and recovery efforts for displaced affected Ethiopians, including returnees and their vulnerable host communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Andre. Questions? Yes, Lisa, go ahead.
Who are the biggest refugees? Most of the refugees who go there, and are refugees still fleeing to Ethiopia as we speak?
There is no massive influx right now, but Ethiopia has a long history of hosting refugees from many nations. It is currently hosting 735,000 refugees from 26 different countries, 26 different nationalities. The majority of them are from South Sudan. They amount to almost half of the group, 329,000 plus. Then second largest group are Somalis with more than 190,000 refugees in Ethiopia. Eritreans come in third place with more than 139,000, and then Sudan with more than 42,000 refugees on Ethiopian territory. The number of refugees is expected to grow substantially during the course of the year as the country continues to receive refugees with nearly about 100,000 new arrivals that came in 2019.
This may be a little bit far off the mark, and I don't know whether you have an answer to that or whether you do, or maybe even Elizabeth Beers of the World Food Program. Wake up. I heard that there's this huge invasion of locusts in Ethiopia and Kenya, and that this is, going to have a horrible impact upon the food, and that would impact upon your operation as well as others. Do you have some comment on that?
Well, certainly it will have an impact on food security, but right now I do not have any details that would help me to answer your question of how directly this is exposing the refugee or displaced communities. Clearly, refugees and the internally displaced live and are equally affected by the things that affect the entire population. So if there is an effect that is, it has an impact on the food safety for the local communities in Ethiopia, by default it will have a rollover effect also on the displaced communities and refugees. But I cannot give you a more precise answer right now on what might be the effects of the current issue that you raised.
Jens has joined us. You have something to add on this?
Yes, I want to add because from perspective of our response, in fact, because a couple of days ago we released $10 million from the Central Emergency Response Fund exactly to help counter this outbreak. So it's an outbreak that is covering East Africa, the Horn of Africa. It has also been noted in Southwest Asia, and the Red Sea is the worst of its kind in 25 years for Ethiopia and Somalia. It is also the worst Kenya has seen for 70 years. The impacts in these countries are particularly acute as pasture and crops are being wiped out in communities that were already facing food shortages. This desert locust is among the most dangerous migratory pests in the world. A single locust can travel 150 kilometers and eat its own weight in food, about 2 grams each day. A small swarm can consume the equivalent of food for 35,000 people in one day. They reproduce rapidly, and if left unchecked, the current numbers could grow 500 times by June. So the $10 million allocation from the Central Emergency Response Fund will go to UN Food and Agricultural Organization and fund an increase in pesticide aerial spraying operations, which, given the scale of the current swarms, is the only effective means to reduce the locust numbers. I have a press release on that I can share with you in its entirety.
How many people are potentially affected by this? And when the spraying begins, when this operation begins, is it something that it can deal with the problem fairly rapidly, or is this something that is likely to go on for a lengthy period of time?
These are very good questions. As I gave you an indication of the potential devastation of biblical proportions of these locust swarms. Now we are trying to address the situation before it becomes extremely bad. It's already, as I mentioned, the worst we have seen in decades in these countries. So, of course, the aerial spraying with pesticides is an effective intervention. It kills the locusts. Hopefully, that will work. Now, we across the Horn of Africa and East Africa, people are monitoring this very closely, and if it spreads further, of course, the response to it will need to be scaled up.
Elisabeth Beer from the World Food Programme, do you have something to add?
Lisa, no, just because I alerted the headquarters yesterday about this information on locust, and it's, FAO as the lead, first of all, and there is a press conference now with FAO in Nairobi, and I think we'll know more in the coming days, because I'm expecting an operational brief. What can I tell you so far? That in Kenya, WFP is feeding refugee camps, and but they are feeding the camps, and so far we do not have the figure for the locust areas which are infected. So I'm expecting exactly what are the action taken in the locust area. But so far we continue the action we have. So I will get a brief later. Sorry.
Just a very quick follow-up. I'd like to know whether the UN is likely to make some kind of an appeal, flash appeal or whatever it is in the coming days, Jens, about the situation. I mean, you've given $1 million. That's very generous, but not good enough, I think, to deal with this crisis.
It's still early days. I cannot say that it will happen. I cannot exclude it either. It really depends on how things develop from now on. The 10 million from the SURF, which is of course due to the generosity of the donors who actually pay the money to the SURF, is a good. It's an early intervention to try to nip this in the bud. But it is clear that also the countries affected are very much alert on this and doing their best to prevent it from spreading any further.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, one last question from Dario, AFP.
Sorry, different subject. Yeah.
For whom?
Yeah, so first question is for WHO. There was a talk yesterday about an international mission to deal with the virus in China. I was just wondering if you had any more details about the mission and the scope and who's taking part and when it's going to be. And for you, Rael, we're expecting peace talks on Libya in Geneva sometime soon. Are you able to give us an idea when that might be? Thank you.
Okay, we'll let Andre, Jens, and Elizabeth go. Yeah, Tariq, can you come up and maybe give some information on the question about WHO? You have no detail. Merci. Okay, quite clear from WHO. Is this on the same issue, Taha?
No,
WHO?
I have a question for WFP.
Okay, well, let me answer the questions first from Dario. Regarding Libya, it is expected that there will be a meeting sometime next week. I don't, unfortunately, have specific dates or much information, but Mr. Salamé, of course, is calling for a meeting of this military 5+5 committee that has been created, and its main task would be to translate the current truce into something a little bit more permanent in terms of a ceasefire. So we're waiting to hear more news on that. As I said on Tuesday, as soon as we have any details to give you, we will come back to you. But yes, we've seen the reports. There's talk of this meeting happening, and I think it is expected to happen, but we just don't have the nitty-gritty of it just yet. Tahar?
I have a question for WFP. As visibility, the situation in Syria is getting more and more worse. Do you have any updates on Idlib, on this situation?
What I have on Idlib so far
Elisabeth,
is...
je vais te demander de revenir au podium puisque c'est mieux pour la caméra. Désolé.
Yes. On Idlib, we have seen in northwestern Syria extreme levels of fighting since hostility there were renewed in mid-December. WFP is now scaling up to provide emergency food assistance to more than 126,000 displaced people through its cross-border operation from Turkey. In December alone, more than 3,000 and people were displaced from Idlib, 80% of them women and children. Most displaced families have been relocated north to Dana sub-district, which is densely populated with camps and settlements. Since January last year, in 2019, since the beginning of 2019, WFP Syria has significantly increased its food assistance in northwest Syria from 550,000 in January to reach, by the end of December, 1 million beneficiaries. WFP and its partners are now prepositioning life-saving food for more than 1 million people in northwest Syria for 6 weeks. And it's, what can I just can say that it's vital we continue to be able to reach these desperately vulnerable people whose lives have been torn apart by fighting. This is the latest I got from our office.
Yeah, the only thing I can add is, of course, from the UN perspective, we remain extremely concerned about the safety of the over 3 million civilians in Idlib and the surrounding areas in the northwest as these growing hostilities intensify. I mean, of course, our the humanitarian agencies like WFP and others on the ground are trying their best to help the civilians, and the UN, of course, can only urge the parties to this conflict and those who have influence over them to ensure the protection of civilians and civilian infrastructure as well, which is very important. And of course, all of this is as part of their obligations under international humanitarian law. Yes, John.
Yeah, I see Rim behind me. Rim, any update from the Special Advisor to the Special Envoy for Humanitarian Issues? She seems to have good channels to Damascus. What's happening there?
There was a question on that, or a request made on Tuesday.
No, I'm asking one now.
Yeah, I know. Do you have anything else to add, Rim? I think the request has been made to Najat to see if
I'm sorry, can you mention that on the mic, please?
Do you have anything to add, Rim? Okay, Rim doesn't have anything to add.
Yeah, if she can put it on the record. I'm sorry.
No, but what we've said on Tuesday when the question was asked, whether Ms. Rushdie would be able to give a briefing.
No, my question is not whether she would put a briefing, if she has any new information, since she has direct channels to Damascus. She has been there, she has seen senior officials. So what's the latest from her office on the situation that Elizabeth just briefed?
Okay. Rim, do you have, just tell John what you can. If you don't have any information, we'll try to get some for you. And
thanks, John. Yep. As Rial mentioned, we did touch on this on Tuesday, but I will take it back to her and come back with more details. She is on mission currently. The HTF met last week, as had been announced, and the work is continuing. I will come back with more details from her specifically to you. Okay.
Is she on mission to Syria?
I can't speak on her mission because it's not a mission to Syria, no.
Yes, Lisa.
Just Elizabeth, could you send your notes to us, please? Thank you.
Gabriela?
Yes, thank you. I have a question for Tariq, if he can update us on the numbers, because they changed, and I would like to have the update. Thanks.
Tariq is making his way up.
Thanks, Gabriela. Well, look, we are getting our information from Chinese authorities, and we are looking really now how to change our system. You know that we've been issuing these SITREP, situation reports, every evening, but the information was from really almost 24 hours before that. The reason why we were doing that way was because, you know, we just don't want to give numbers, because you can get the numbers on a website of Chinese national authorities. We want really, you can. Well, you know, our colleagues are finding it, so I can give you the link where we are getting it. So what we are trying to do really is to get some analysis in a situation report so it has some added value. So I can give you the numbers that I have read from national health authorities from last night. It was about midnight, I think. And that was like 830 cases, including 25 deaths. That's in China.
Outside China?
I don't have the latest number.
That is one that I would like to know. Outside China, how many cases?
I don't have the latest number.
You don't have any? The latest?
Well, I can look my notes. I have numbers from I think 24, 48 hours ago. So.
I'm sure the situation is evolving, and WHO is monitoring this very closely.
Just a clarification: these 830 and 25 deaths, they were conveyed from the Chinese authorities to WHO country office in Beijing when? Yesterday?
Under international health regulations, so it is being conveyed to WHO. And again,
these are confirmed cases conveyed to WHO. Were they conveyed before the meeting finished here yesterday?
No.
Okay, you got it after.
Yes.
Thanks.
And this is really the issue. And as Rael said, the numbers will be changing. And I don't think that it's really the point on numbers. What we really have to look, and this is what Mike Ryan, for those who were with us last 2 nights in WHO, they could have heard from Mike Ryan that we really have to, it's still too early to draw the conclusions on how severe the virus is. Because at the beginning of any outbreak, you would focus more on severe cases, and you will have more of those, and then maybe we are missing some mild cases because people will just be a little bit sick and will not be ever tested, and they will recover. So we may see more mild cases as surveillance intensifies. So the issue is not so much really on numbers that we know that will go up.
Gabriela, quickly.
Very quickly. Just a clarification. So for coronavirus, there is no antiviral, no medicine, no vaccine, nothing for coronavirus. Sorry.
Okay, so let's be very clear here. So there is no particular treatment, but it doesn't mean that you cannot treat people because, and if you look into our clinical guidance, and I was reading it the other day, it's really like you look what symptoms that the person presents to you. So you look if there is dyspnea, it's a breathing problem, is it a fever? In severe cases, it will go to pneumonia. So depending on symptoms and stages, you will then provide certain treatment. But there is no particular treatment for this particular virus, just as there is no particular treatment for MERS that is being around since 2012. There are some trials looking into what could work better, but there is no particular antiviral treatment. Same for vaccine. There is no particular vaccine. There is some work being done, and there are some trials now for MERS, and we may look at some point whether those treatments and vaccines would have some effect on this novel coronavirus. So this is work that is being done. So we are working really with our networks to try to understand the virus, try to see how diagnostics could be done, to see what works and what doesn't. But we are still at the early stage.
Okay, thank you very much, Tariq. Stephanie, sorry, you had a question.
Tarek, thank you. With this surge in cases overnight, and its reports that the Chinese have said that they're building this 1,000-bed hospital in Wuhan, there's also some reports in different cities, now that 10 are affected in China, 10 cities, that there are some people, there's been a rush on masks and so forth. Are you getting, is WHO supplying anything in terms of protective equipment for healthcare workers or others? Is there a flow of any support to China at this point? And can you comment on the also there's some reports about some of the symptoms have been changing, that there's more vomiting and diarrhea in some cases. That's just one report we've seen.
I'm not aware.
Anyway,
I'm not aware of any changes in symptoms. We work really with the national authorities from day one, as we have been saying. We had a mission that was in Wuhan a couple of days ago. And then they were really looking into more on epidemiological data, case definition, and these sort of things. I'm not aware that we have received any requests for material supplies.
I have a question.
No, we need to set it up. I mean, Tariq is here.
Two press conferences. We had a press conference last night and night before, so exactly. I don't understand that some people did not come.
No, but this situation
can we take them offline? Tariq is here. Please take them offline with Tariq, okay? We need to move on. Today is International Day of Education. Vincent Fournier from UNESCO is here to tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, thank you, Rael. Today, as it was mentioned, UNESCO celebrates the International Day of Education with the focus on its Futures of Education initiative. As part of the events organized around the second edition of this International Day, UNESCO is organizing in Paris a conference highlighting the many ways learning can empower people, preserve the planet, build shared prosperity, and foster peace. The celebration of the International Day of Education will highlight its centrality to the international community's collective development ambitions, the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. And as emphasized by the Director General of UNESCO, Andrea Azoulay, education is the cornerstone of the SDGs. If we fail on education, the entire structure of development will fall down. At the UN headquarters in New York, UNESCO will present a new online tool, Education Progress, which will enable members of the public, as well as education planners and partners, to check countries' progress in achieving global SDG for education. The International Day of Education contributes to ongoing reflection on rethinking education and how it contributes to our societies in line with the Futures of Education initiative, launched last September in New York by Ms. Azoulay and led by the President of Ethiopia, Sahle-Work Zewde. The Director General named leading figures from the worlds of politics, academia, the arts, science, business, and education to form an independent commission on the futures of education. It is chaired by the President of Ethiopia, and the Commission has been tasked with rethinking the role of education in shaping the future and meeting humanity's needs. Professional and lay people are invited to contribute their vision on how education should be developed by 2050 through online platform launched by UNESCO. And several events will also be organized in Geneva as part of the UN 75 from 20 to 24 April. The International Commission on the Future of Education will publish the outcome of its work as a report in November 2021, and it will articulate on forward-looking vision and policy agenda for the future of knowledge and learning. Thank you.
Thank you, Vincent. Any questions on this? Thank you. You have a message, I assume, an official message from UNESCO that's available?
We will forward it.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Just to another important international day that is being celebrated in the next few days. The 27th of January, as you all know, is the International Day of Commemoration in memory of the victims of the Holocaust. I've put copies of the Secretary General's message at the back in English and in French, in which he says, on this day we come together to remember one of the most heinous crimes of our time, the systematic killing of 6 million Jewish men, women, and children, and millions of others by the Nazis and their collaborators in the Holocaust. We pledge that we will never forget. We vow to tell their stories and honor them by defending everyone's right to live with dignity in a just and peaceful world. Unfortunately, 75 years on, neo-Nazis and white supremacists are resurgent, and there are continued efforts to diminish the Holocaust and deny or downplay the responsibility of perpetrators. The Secretary General concludes, but just as hatred persists, so must our resolve to fight it. We commemorate the victims of the Holocaust by pursuing truth, remembrance, and education, and by building peace and justice around the world. And on this, I've also put at the back, or you've been given the program of our extensive activities around the International Day this year. Just a reminder that at 12:30, I think it's 12:30, there's the inauguration of the wonderful exhibition Lest We Forget, which is a major photographic installation by photographer and filmmaker Luigi Toscano, who has spent a year traveling, meeting and capturing the portrait photos of Holocaust survivors all over the world. About 100 of his photos are exhibited in the Hall des Pas Perdus, the passerelle that links buildings A and E, and also, since I believe this morning, because I walked through them, on the Place des Nations. Very striking photos. It's going to be there until the 31st of January, and the official inauguration will be at I think it's 12:30 in the Salle des Pas Perdus. So please attend if you can. Then, as I said on Tuesday, on Monday is the official ceremony at 4 p.m. in the Assembly Hall. We will have Holocaust survivor Paul Sobol from Belgium with us to tell his story of the Holocaust. If any of you are interested in doing an interview with him, please contact me. We will, I think, have a little bit of time on Monday for such interviews. And then the other event that I want to highlight is the one next Wednesday evening on the 29th at 7 p.m. at the University of Geneva at Unimae, where the UN Information Service and the CICAD are bringing their second-generation program to the university. Basically, two descendants of Nazi officers and two descendants of deported resistance fighters will be testifying very courageously. I think it's going to be a well-attended event. There's about 400 spaces, and I think yesterday registration was already at 330 or so. So if you want to attend, please register. Registration is not mandatory. You're not going to be given a ticket, but it's just so we can try to see what kind of attendance we can expect. Anyway, take a look at the program, and I hope to see you at these events next week. Any questions on this? Yes, John? Oh, okay.
It's a logistical question.
Yes.
If these talks on Libya take place as scheduled next week, will they be in the Palais or outside of the Palais?
As I just told your colleague from AFP, I don't have the specifics of that. We can confirm that a meeting is expected to take place next week of this 5+5 military committee, but I don't have any much more.
Surely you would know by now, for security purposes, if it's in the Palais or not. We need to know for logistical purposes.
I'm afraid we're also waiting for details of that. And as soon as we have them, of course, we will be informing all of you. Just to conclude, a reminder of a press conference next Monday, 27th of January at 12 p.m. in Press Room 1. UNCTAD will be presenting its first illicit trade. Yes, will be presenting its first illicit trade forum, which will be happening on the 3rd and the 4th of February. And then at 3:30 p.m. in Press Room 1, Dan Prusen from the WTO will be giving a briefing on the dispute settlement body meeting. And finally, the Conference on Disarmament will hold next Tuesday morning at 10. It's public plenary. And Ms. Valovaya will be addressing the conference as Secretary General of the Conference on Disarmament. The Committee on the Rights of the Child will also begin next Monday afternoon its review of the report of Rwanda and continue with the State of Palestine on the 28th and Austria on the 30th. And that's all I have for you. Yes, Gabriela.
Thank you, Real. Another logistical question or comment. Coronavirus is a world news, and everybody, I mean, we want to know, we want to ask, and so WHO should have a strategic communication plan for us. I mean, we can't ask during the briefings, I know, I mean, you have a lot of things, but, I mean, our editors, the people, I mean, there's a lot of, questions that they have been asked. So I would appreciate if you can talk and discuss this with the WHO to give us a space. Thanks.
Yeah, Gabriela, just on Tuesday, Tariq was here and spoke about 40 minutes on this topic, and then WHO has just had two, evening press conferences after the meetings. So, I mean, there has been a lot of information communicated. Tariq and Fadela and the rest of the team remain available for any questions that you might have, and I'm sure they have every intention of holding other press briefings or press conferences as they have new information to share with you. But don't hesitate to contact them. I'm sure they'll be very happy to try to help you as much as they can.
Yeah, but
yes,
if I
Lisa?
just may, there is such interest, ongoing interest, that even though there were 2 horrible late nights to do with this thing, editors are absolutely voracious, and so it would have been good had you not squelched the questions that wanted to be asked, because this is really a topic that needs to be dealt with. And I know we can talk to them. It's not always easy to talk to them. There are other conflicting things to be done. So if Tariq was there, I wish you had allowed him to speak more. Thank you.
Well, we try to give, space to everybody. As you can see, it's already 11:45. My objective in 2020 was to keep this briefing to 1 hour, and I've already not met my resolution. So, again, we take note of your concerns. We'll try to get as much information out there. The WHO team really remains at your disposal for any questions you have. Thank you very much.